this video, I'm going to talk about exposure and how each of your settings interact with each other to make adjustments. Exposure is the use of all your camera's light controlling methods to make an image. Cameras use three systems for controlling light. ISO controls the sensitivity, aperture controls the intensity, and shutter speed controls the amount of time that the camera is exposed for. Each of your settings can make your image brighter or darker. This means that you have to balance them with each other to make a good exposure both technically and artistically. This is where stops come in. A stop is any time you multiply or divide the amount of light by 2. With ISO you can double the brightness by going from 100 to 200, or you can cut that brightness in half by going from 800 to 400. With shutter speed you do the same thing with time. So if you go from 1/500th of a second to 1/1000th of a second, you've cut the amount of light in half. Where if you go from 1/125th of a second to 1/60th of a second, you've doubled the amount of light. With aperture, it's a little less straightforward. Because the aperture is circular, the numbers aren't in multiples of 2, but the concept is still the same in the sequence. If you go from 1.4 to f2, you've cut the amount of light in half. If you go from f5.6 to f4, you've doubled the amount of light. Because all of the settings work this way, it makes them interchangeable when you're making adjustments to your camera. So if you make your aperture 1 stop brighter, you can make your shutter speed 1 stop darker to compensate. Or if you make your ISO 2 stops brighter, you can change both your aperture and your shutter speed to each be 1 stop darker to counteract the 2 stops in difference. This means that you can favor the benefits or style of one setting over another simply by counteracting them with the opposite settings. Let's use an example. If I set my ISO to 400, my shutter speed to 1/500th, and my aperture to f11, this is the image that I get. But what if I want that image to have shallow depth of field? What I can do is open my aperture to f4, but now my image is too bright. Now, because I have made it 3 stops brighter, I need to make it 3 stops darker somewhere else. So what I'll do is make the ISO 2 stops darker by changing it from 400 to 100. And for the last stop, I'll change my shutter speed from 1/500th of a second to 1/1000th. Now I have the same overall exposure, but I've changed the settings to fit my creative needs. You can do this with all your settings as long as the lighting situation allows it. Now that we know how to adjust our exposure, we can talk about why this is important. Generally with exposure, we're trying to get the most information as possible in the image, as well as make that image fit our artistic vision. If we use our adjustments incorrectly, there's a possibility that there will be an overexposure or underexposure, and in that case, we'll lose information. If we use settings that don't fit our artistic vision, then the photo won't have the same effect that we wanted it to. So to combat this, there is a few things that you can do. Number 1, use your meter. If you haven't seen my video on that, I suggest watching it. Meter for the area that's important and adjust from there. Number 2, bracket your exposures. This is where you take multiple photos, adjusting each time to give you a range of exposures. Number 3, check the back of your screen. A lot of people say not to check your screen, not to chimp and do these things, but it's there for a reason. You can practice and learn from those mistakes. When you get the hang of it, you won't need to do this as much anymore. Number 4, be patient. This is a learning process and it's going to take time to get it right. I mess up sometimes and so will you. The best thing you can do is put this to work. Set your camera to manual and adjust your settings individually so that you can see how they affect each other. A good thing to try is to set your camera to live view so that you can see the changes happening right in front of you. I hope this video was helpful. Feel free to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.